the world that begin to put up barriers to the globally connected internet, because so much of the investment thesis that drives groups like you and others today is predicated on the assumption that we have a coordinated, integrated internet. Do you worry about the splinter net?
Not as much, candidly. I think even if with a new generation of internet competitors around Web 3.0, I think we'll want to access a global market. There's just so much incentive to do that. So and the world wants to communicate. So I'm not as worried. What I am worried about, and this is ties into one of our sessions later today, is this whole issue of election meddling via technology. And Victor and I had a great conversation this morning, and I told him that if you look at the top Facebook countries, the top 5 are all democracies. The largest Facebook country in the world, the United States is number 2. The number 1 is India, democracy. U.S. number 2, 270 million people on Facebook in India, 220 in the United States. Third, Brazil, about 200.
Yeah.
And you go right down the list. So all the countries that are important large-scale democracies are also completely wired and connected. And if you think about what happened with the U.S. election via social media, it could happen. It could happen in the Brazil election, which should be later this year. In the Indian election next year, we saw it happen this year in a number of the elections in Europe. That gives me quite a bit of concern because it's systemic and very hard, very difficult to deal with. To deal with,
yes. Last quick question. We're just about out of time. Very quickly, given that you are such an experienced investor, given that you look around the world, look at the big themes, if you had any top tips for any of this audience about one place that you think people should invest now and one thing they should absolutely not invest under any circumstances, what would that be?
Oh, God, that's really hard. Okay, I'm not sure it would qualify as a tip. I think the next big sphere of innovation is going to be in biology and life sciences. I think the genomic revolution that began 15 years ago is beginning to yield tremendous new therapeutic breakthroughs. And I think a young person thinking about the next 25 years of investing, just like the last 25 was more about information technology, I think the next 25 years, some of the most exciting stuff will happen in human biology and life sciences.
Okay, so get excited about bioscience. And what would you not touch under any circumstance? And don't say what the last time I asked anyone that question, they turned around and said to me, the one thing I would never invest in is newspapers.
I promise I won't say that.
You might feel that, but anyway.
I have a contrarian view. I think information is more valuable than ever, and so I don't have the...
Well, I love you already. What would you not invest in under any circumstances?
I think it's more country-based. I mean, there's certain countries that I feel are, really where the rule of law is not there, and I think exposing capital to those places is extremely risky. And,
anywhere in particular?
Without naming names, I mean...
Well, please do name names. I'm sure the audience would love to know.
I think Russia is, I mean, I don't get in trouble with Russian people here, but, I really believe it because why has that country not been able to transform itself? Tremendous human capital, large country, and it has not been able to transform itself from being a commodity-driven, and not really even tried to transform itself in a commodity-driven economy and not respected the rule of law. And I think that's a place where, despite a lot of, human capital there, we just won't expose our capital to. And
anywhere else?
Well, I could go on. Venezuela, I mean, we could go down the list, but they're all places that, are often commodity-producing countries that have relied on commodity wealth that's been a source of corruption and centralization of economic power.
Right.
That have really closed off investment opportunities and closed off entrepreneurship.
Right.
And so,
well, that's fascinating. Thank you. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your candid answers. And best of luck in figuring out where to find some exciting bioscience opportunities.
Great.
So
thank you, Gillian. Thanks as always.
And now to follow on from the theme of the innovation and the future, we're going to hear from Stephen Sackler, who is a renowned figure on the BBC, interview of Hard Talk, who's going to be talking about the future.
Thank you very much, Gillian. Welcome, everybody. Hello. It's such a pleasure for me to be back with you. For those of you who are regulars at YES, at our annual conference, I guess I'm a bit of a familiar figure now. It's a great pleasure to be back. Victor, thank you for inviting me back. And without further ado, let me invite to the stage our very special third contributor to these thoughts about the future. Please welcome Ray Kurzweil. Ray, please join me. Ray is just getting wired for sound, which is fitting in a way because as Ray comes to the stage, I'll just tell you a little bit about him. One of his wonderful inventions, because he is an inventor, he's a futurologist, an author. He is the person, ladies and gentlemen, who, amongst other things, gave us the synthesizer. Also, he's one of the greatest inventors in the field of voice technology, all sorts of different things from text to audio to voice recognition. He is in the Inventors Hall of Fame. So Ray, it is wonderful to have you here on the stage. What we're going to do, we've had Neil Ferguson's perspective from the point of view of an historian. We've had the brilliant analysis of one of the world's leading investors and money men. We've got you here as a futurologist to talk in the most sort of blue sky terms about where you think we as a species are going. So what I want you to do is give us some opening remarks, and then I hope I'm going to have an opportunity to quiz you a little bit. But give us your opening thoughts from the point of view of a futurologist.
Well, it's great to be here. Let me share a few thoughts with you. I've been involved with this, what was an obscure academic field, artificial intelligence, since 1962, 6 years after it was named at a Dartmouth conference. I'll come back to that, but in terms of the future theme, I started to think about how to time my inventions in 1981. And I started with the common wisdom that you cannot predict the future. But being an engineer, I thought I would gather a lot of data, use the right visualization tools, squint at the visualizations, and maybe I'd have a few insights. I made a surprising discovery. There's one thing about the future that's remarkably predictable, and I call it the law of accelerating returns. Moore's law is just one example, one paradigm of many that follows this. And it's this: the price, performance, and capacity, not of everything and not of every technology, but of every information technology, follows a very predictable trajectory. And that trajectory is exponential and not linear. And our intuition about the future is linear, not exponential. So as an example of that, halfway through the Genome Project, 7 years into this 14-year project, 1% of the genome had been collected. Mainstream critics called it a failure, saying, okay, 7 years, 1%, it's going to take 700 years, just like we said. My reaction at the time was, oh, we finished 1%, we're almost done, because 1% is only 7 doublings from 100%. It had been doubling every year. I believed, for various reasons, that would continue. It was finished 7 years later. Every other aspect of biology, not just genetic sequencing costs and capacity, but our ability to understand the data, to simulate it, to model it, and most importantly, to change this outdated software that runs in our bodies, is also progressing at an exponential pace. And we just heard a prediction about biology. I think we are now getting clinical impact. These technologies are thousands of times more powerful than they were in 2003 when the Genome Project was completed. And what is a trickle today of clinical applications like immunotherapy, reprogramming the immune system to go after cancer, this will be a flood over the next decade. I'll make one other comment about that. Well, it applies to everything. I mean, I had the price performance of computation going back to Babbage's analytical engine in the mid-19th century. up through 1980, it was a perfect double exponential. And it was a perfect double exponential. And it was a very smooth curve. And you didn't see any evidence of little incidents like World War I or the Great Depression or World War II or the Cold War or the recent recession. It goes through thick and thin, through war and peace, through boom times and recessions. So I had an onstage dialogue with Christine Lagarde at one of our recent IMF annual meetings. And she said, yes, it's fantastic what digital technology can do, but how come we don't see this in the productivity statistics? And I said, well, we don't count it. So when this quintessential teenager in Africa or any emerging country buys a smartphone for $75, it counts as $75 of economic activity, despite the fact that it's literally billions of dollars of computation and communication circa 1970. The encyclopedia that's on there counts for zero. The encyclopedia I bought as a teenager and saved up for years for my paper route for thousands of dollars, that counted for thousands of dollars of economic activity. So she said, okay, the digital world is quite remarkable and it seems to have its own economic rules, but you can't wear information technology, you can't eat it, you can't live in it. And I said, all of that's going to change. These traditionally physical products are going to become information technologies. We're going to grow food in vertical agriculture controlled by AI. We're going to print out clothing. We don't have the parameters yet. We need submicron resolutions, a greater speed, but we'll be there in the early 2020s. We'll print out clothing on 3D printers. We'll print out modules we can snap together to create buildings. That's been demonstrated. These are early demos, but that will be the nature of physical products in the 2020s. And finally she said, well, one resource that's not information technology is land. We're already crowded together. And I said, no, we're not. I mean, take a train trip anywhere in the world and you'll see 90% of the land is unused. We've crowded ourselves together so that we can work and play together. Virtual reality and augmented reality this really hasn't happened yet. That'll take off also in the 2020s, and we'll be able to really do the things we do when we're together, even if we're apart. We'll use this unused land. We'll start being able to use the 40% of the land that we use for horizontal agriculture. And these trends are remarkably smooth and predictable. I had this data, for example, of computation, communication through 1980. I projected it to 2050. We're now 37 years later, and these curves, the price performance of computing, for example, is right where it should be. So this is not just overfitting to past data.
Well, I think one of the most important concepts you've emphasized there, Ray, is this understanding of the exponential as opposed to the linear progression. So on that basis, let's talk specifics. Let's start perhaps with artificial intelligence, which is a phrase bandied around all of the time now by everybody from economists to politicians to even historians looking forward. In your view, given that notion of exponential progress, how dramatic are the changes we are going to see in what machines can do in the course of the next 10 to 15 years?
Right. Well, there's two aspects. It's the hardware and the software. I've had an estimate of 10 to the 14th calculations per second to functionally emulate the capabilities of the human brain. Some other thinkers have done this in different ways and come up with the same figure. We've now greatly surpassed that. The TPU board from Google has over 10 to the 16th. That's over 100 human brain equivalents. So that's the hardware. The more important issue is the software. And we're making fantastic gains, and we're solving some really key problems to be able to perform a valid Turing test and achieve human intelligence, which I've been very consistent in saying will happen by 2029.
Okay, so what about Neil Ferguson's interesting point about chess, where you've got these deep mind computers now that can beat the grandmasters at chess, but what he cleverly pointed out is that they're not necessarily yet able to design a game to match chess in its subtlety, complexity, and its nuance. So that thing about crossing a bridge from just being the most brilliant linear sort of computers to being creative, to autonomous thought, which to some of us is a scary notion, but nonetheless it surely is the end game for artificial intelligence. Are we on the cusp of that?
Well, you have to look at several issues. We have actually a reasonably good understanding of the algorithms of the neocortex, which is where we do these things, invent new games and new technologies and create art. We're using them in my team at Google. We can now do a reasonable job of understanding language, which Turing set as the sort of ultimate test of artificial intelligence. Recently, an AI was able to surpass average adult performance at paragraph understanding, where you read a paragraph and answer questions about it. That's a pretty good example of understanding human language. Computers have shown creativity in the area of art and music. We're able to now actually write language. One of my programs for my team is Smart Reply, where it gives you 3 suggestions to answer your emails and has to understand the meaning of the email. If you Google talk to books, you'll get a link where you can then ask a question. The software for my team will read 100,000 books, 600 million sentences in half a second, which is pretty good. It takes me hours to read 100,000 books. And give you the best excerpts that actually answer the question based on meaning, not keywords. There are many milestones, including transfer learning. One of the up to now, unique capabilities of the human brain is that we can learn a new field using knowledge from completely different fields that we've mastered. We're now actually demonstrating that in various ways.
Okay, well, I'm being a little crass and a little crude because we don't have much time, but I'm also a journalist and I'm always seeking out the sort of sensational headlines. So let me just put to you something that you've painted as a picture of the future and ask you perhaps to give us a little bit more background on what it means. You've said, we will ultimately merge with our machines, we will live indefinitely and become 1 billion times more intelligent. Are we to take all of that seriously?
Well, it's not all at the same time, but I think we have merged with this. This is not inside my body yet. It might as well be, because I don't go very far without it. And it is a brain extender. A quintessential teenager in Africa has access to all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes. Who here could do their jobs or get their education without these brain extenders that we have? Another predictable exponential trend is miniaturization. By the 2030s, we will have devices the size of blood cells that will go inside our body. There are precursors of these, but we're not really there yet in terms of price performance. But 2030s, we will have intelligent devices traveling in our bloodstream. They will augment the immune system and keep
traveling in our bloodstream,
keeping us healthier. They'll provide virtual and augmented reality from within the nervous system. And they will extend our neocortex by connecting the top layers of our neocortex to the cloud. If you remember 2 million years ago, we were walking around without these big foreheads. We got this one-time shot of additional neocortex, which we put at the top levels. As you go up the hierarchy of the neocortex, things get more interesting. So that was the enabling factor for us to invent language and art and music. And we're going to do it again by connecting the top layers of our neocortex wirelessly to synthetic neocortex in the cloud. We're already creating synthetic neocortex. This makes itself 1 million times more powerful and capable by connecting to the cloud. It wouldn't do very much without that.
All right, let me ask you some quick-fire questions. Are we going to be able to, and maybe this is a weird phrase, but engineer the equivalent of the human brain? You know, can we sort of, the equivalent of the human brain? You know, can we sort of reverse engineer the human brain?
Well, we're doing exactly that. The European Brain Reverse Engineering Project under Henry Markram actually has corroborated a thesis I've had for several decades, that the neocortex consists of 300 million modules, and each module learns a pattern, and those modules self-organize into a hierarchy, and we can actually see that now happening in real time.
Well,
we're getting reasonably good models of how the neocortex works. These are being improved. I think we'll have very accurate models by the 2030s. We're using the models that we have now to actually do intelligent things, including, as I mentioned, transfer learning, being able to learn a new field much more quickly because of the knowledge we have from something completely unrelated. So yes, we will ultimately emulate the general design of the human brain, but it won't be limited then to 300 million modules and have the various limitations that human intelligence has.
No, indeed. So I suppose I'm trying to envision what all of these capabilities and the exponential sort of process, the ever-increasing pace of change.
Let me give you an example. Our talk-to-books doesn't quite understand human language as well as humans, but it's much faster. It can read, as I say, 100,000 books in a half a second. So once a computer can do something, it can apply tremendous speed. And it also very quickly, once it can do things at average human level, quickly soars past it. You saw that in Go. It was playing a fair game of Go. Months later, it soared past the best human.
Yeah, but here's the big picture thought. Neil Ferguson, again, it was interesting the way he put it. He said, look, I'm rereading Shakespeare, and I'm also considering everything that has happened in human history since, the Greek and Roman empires, and I'm thinking to myself that in the end, what matters most to the way we conduct ourselves as a species is our basic humanity, our human condition, all of our strengths and flaws as human beings. He said, let's not overestimate the power of technology as the ultimate driver of where we as a species are going. For you, as a technologist, a futurist, and an inventor, is your perspective different? Do you think that in the end, the technology is going to dictate where we as a species go?
Well, there's two different thoughts there. I mean, one is, will AI achieve human levels? And as long as there's anything that humans can do that AI can't do, people will tout that. Then when that falls to the floor, people are touting something else. We're not at 2029 yet. I've been consistent at that estimate. My view and the consensus view of AI experts is getting closer together. When I first said this in 1999, Stanford held a conference, and the consensus view is it would be hundreds of years. 25% thought never. Now the consensus view is maybe 20 to 30 years. I'm saying 11, so I'm still more optimistic, but not by that much. And as I say, once computers can do something, it'll quickly soar past human capability, but it's not an alien invasion of intelligent machines from Mars to compete with us and displace us. These are extensions of who we are. We have been a biological, technological society going back to its roots thousands of years ago. And we are going to merge with this technology we have already. I mean, we don't create these things. They're not in centralized facilities. They're in our pockets. They're in our clothing. They're going to go inside our bodies. That's an arbitrary distinction.
So if one adds that, the incredible access to intelligence that we are acquiring, add to that all of the work you're doing on genetics and longevity and your belief that ultimately we're going to live an awful long time, indefinitely maybe. Hard to put an age limit on human beings looking ahead.
There's a merger of biology and AI. We're actually approaching the ability to simulate biology. You might think, well, biology is infinitely complex. There's actually only 50 million bytes of compressed information in the genome. It's not infinitely complicated. Waymo has simulated the world of driving, which you might think is infinitely complicated, and they've run a simulated car 1 billion miles in the simulator, and have created enough data for deep learning now to improve their algorithms. We're going to do the same thing with biology.
So we can indefinitely delay aging and death?
Yeah, I mean, I believe we're not far away, certainly in a small number of decades, from longevity escape velocity, where we add more time than is going by, not just to infant life expectancy, but to our remaining life expectancy. Because you can still be hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow, but we're working on that too with self-driving cars. So,
I love the fact I love the fact you've been provided with a cup of coffee to keep these thoughts going. I think you might want to. I'm not sure you need to take a sip actually, because you're fizzing anyway. But to me, a lot of what you're painting, because perhaps I'm a little skeptical about human nature and humanity's never-ending capacity to sort of screw things up. I find a lot of your vision of the future worrying. Do you?
Well, I think there are existential risks. I mean, the first technologically created existential risk emerged when I was a child, and we had civil defense drills in our elementary school where we'd get under our desks and put our hands behind our head to protect us from a thermonuclear war. It worked. We made it through, but we now will have new existential risks. Biotechnology could present a risk. The same technology we're using to reprogram, let's say, our immune system to go after cancer could be used by a bioterrorist to reprogram a benign virus to be more deadly, more stealthy, more communicable. The Asilomar guidelines have actually worked quite well, but it's not a pat solution. We have to keep working on that. So there are grave dangers. There are more subtle dangers like privacy, and we were talking about totalitarian control using these technologies. These are feasible. There's still an important role for governance and history and philosophy to actually utilize these forces.
I tell you what, because we've got about 5 or maybe 6 or 7 minutes left, and it's not so often you get one of the world's most renowned, greatest inventors here with an opportunity to quiz him and ask him some questions. Anybody got a sort of a question they'd like to put about Ray's vision of the future? Sir, you've got your hand up. We'll get the microphone to you. Yep, you, sir. Put the microphone right next to your lips, and we should be able to hear you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for this huge personality vision presented by you, moderated by you, Mr. Zucker. I would like to ask you only one question. So, like a lawmaker in Europe, in Council of Europe, I'm always worried if those technologies will be shifted to military field, to robotronic field, and all those flexibilities and sensitivities will be included to the military sensibilities of fighting sides. So how we will be reacting, how we can prevent by law avoiding these terrible future horrors? Thank you.
Well, I think the military certainly has an interest in AI. We've had intelligent weapons actually going back quite a while, since a cruise missile could go halfway around the world and find the right window. It's kind of both positive and negative phenomena. I mean, certainly these more powerful weapons can be more destructive. The actual reality is war has become less destructive because it's more targeted. If you remember carpet bombing in Vietnam and the tremendous destruction of World War II with 60 million deaths in the European theater. You know, we get upset now at wars that cause thousands of deaths, rightfully so, but this is actually the most, even though we have the most powerful technology and the most powerful military technology, this is the most peaceful time in human history.
In brief, is the doomsday vision of autonomous thinking killer robots, is that something that to you is science fiction fantasy plot line, or is it future reality?
It's not science fiction. I mean, that's why we need to focus on governance and maintaining democracy and our values. I think our values. I think the reality, though, is the world is right now is a pretty safe place. And privacy is alive and well. People are using full encryption that's basically unbreakable. And so there's many reasons to be optimistic.
You, it should be said, work for Google. So you're inside one of the biggest, most important tech corporations in the world. Do you, yeah, it's difficult for you to perhaps be frank about this, but when you think about the way Google operates, its sort of core values, its fundamental principles, do you feel content that Google now wields so much power in the world and will do?
Well, I'm content with Google. Don't have an inside view of every other company. Privacy is a huge priority. I mentioned we did this smart reply that answers your emails, and yet our team has never seen a single email because they're private. So the software will respond for you, but we've never seen them. And there's been no publicized breaches of privacy from Google. There has been from other companies. So I think it's a very important issue. But I mean, I think it is a concern.
Okay. Well, Ray, we'll just get at least one more question in before we close for lunch. Go on, sir.
Thank you very much. This is Pierre Lelouch from Paris. If I may, first of all, thank Victor for giving us an exceptional morning. I thought fascinating series of intervention by Mr. Ferguson, Mr. Ford, and you, sir, looking at the future. I want to go back to the question that was just asked. And this morning, Mr. Ferguson used a very interesting comparison between what's happening and the invention of the printing press. What the printing press did was open up an area of knowledge for a lot of people. Enter philosophy, politics, and rule of law. Printing press permitted all that. What I'm seeing now with groups like yours, like Google, like Facebook, like us, all the large, very large multinational companies that are richer than many of the states, that no one controls them. And therefore you are inventing on your invention, modifying the human species at some point, modifying elections, modifying the art of war, with nobody getting in control. So in many ways, it's a reverse of the printing press, because there is no counterbalance to the kind of work that you're doing, which is quite fascinating and admirable in many ways, and I'm sure there's a good side to it. For example, medicine, struggle against cancer and many other diseases. But the societies that stemmed out of your description, from the point of view of a lawmaker, a historian, a government, a citizen, is absolutely scary. Unless there is a way...
All right, yeah, it's a great point, but let Ray answer it. It's probably going to be the last comment we get before lunch, so off you go, Ray.
Well, first of all, let me make a comment that we can trace the development of democratization in the world directly to communication technology. The first stirrings of democracy occurred right around the printing press in England. Didn't become a perfect democracy, but it took significant steps in that direction, and it wasn't a coincidence that the first full-fledged democracy was one of its colonies, even though it broke away from England. As we've had revolutions in communication, radio, television, the computer, the internet, we've seen more and more democratization, despite apparent steps forward and back and left and right. We now have the majority of the world's people living in democracies. That has become a consensus view of the goal of how to organize humanity. That wasn't the case even a century ago. So we very often lose sight of the progress as we try to continue to move forward. I think there is a tremendous counterweight to the power of these companies, which is their users. There was a incident where Facebook had some new privacy regulations that were actually, and they published them, and they were pretty complicated, and no one person could really fully understand it. But the wisdom of crowds actually understood it very quickly and was unhappy with it and pushed back, and Facebook changed its policies very quickly. These companies are very dependent on their users. New companies can arise with the same kinds of capabilities, and the users can go to these new platforms very quickly unless they keep faith with their users. There's a general consensus to put a lot of these information, including how to do AI, in the public domain. Google has put its whole machine learning framework, TensorFlow, public domain. Hundreds of thousands of developers have downloaded it. The software that my team has done to understand natural language, we have made it open source and published how it works. And we think that's a good idea because then it'll be developed further, and we'll get the benefit of that, as will others. We have an ability to bring these products to market, so we think it's beneficial for everybody to use them. But there is a general sharing of how AI works. It's not, these secrets are not locked up under lock and key.
And you obviously remain fundamentally optimistic that 20 years from now, the human species is going to be in a much better place than it is today. There's been a continual trend of improvement in every measure of human well-being, yet the perception is the opposite. So 24,000 people, a poll was taken of 24,000 people in 26 countries. It's just one example of many. Has poverty over the last 20 years gotten better or worse? 87% said incorrectly it's gotten worse. Only 1% said correctly that it has fallen by over 50%. And there's similar comparisons in the area of violence, education, literacy, democratization, renewable energy. I mean, every area of human well-being, we're getting better, while the perception is that we're getting worse because our information about what's wrong with the world is getting better. And this will continue. That being said, and I've been accused of being an optimist, and I think you have to be an optimist to be an entrepreneur, I've written more about the downsides, including the existential downsides, of AI and biotechnology and nanotechnology than anyone else, long before people like Hawking and Musk were talking about the dangers. So I am optimistic, but I'm not unaware or ignoring the promise versus peril of these emerging technologies.
Ray, I thank you so much for your insights. It has been fascinating. I can tell that a lot of people have been really engaged and drawn into this conversation. We've had a lot of big thoughts over the last couple of hours, ladies and gentlemen, so now perhaps is a good moment to take a break, digest some of those thoughts as you are indeed enjoying your lunch. The talk will go on. We're going to talk NATO. We're going to talk what's happening in the United States of America right now over lunch, but please let me invite you to head towards some food, enjoy your lunch, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thanks.